a man once blinded by hate, who looked at black women with disgust and prejudice. To him, they were nothing more than stereotypes, ideas planted deep in his mind by the world he grew up in. But then he met her, and that one meeting changed everything he thought he knew. Welcome to Diary with Pages. Thomas Reed was the kind of man who lived his life inside invisible walls, walls built not from bricks or stone, but from ignorance, fear, and arrogance. To the world he was successful, sharp suits, a powerful job, a man people listened to. He walked through life with a confidence that could intimidate anyone, but behind that confidence there was emptiness, a silence so deep that even his expensive penthouse couldn't fill it. He was raised in a neighborhood where differences were mocked, not celebrated, where dinner conversations were filled with careless jokes about people who didn't look like them, where children learned early that some people didn't belong. Thomas never questioned it. He absorbed it, like poison disguised as pride, and over time, that poison hardened into habit. He didn't think of himself as cruel, just honest. He told himself the world had rules, and he was simply following them. Black women, especially, were the target of his quiet contempt. He saw them as loud, dramatic, unrefined. Words he'd never admit came from ignorance. To him, they were everything he didn't want near his perfect, polished world. But life has a strange sense of irony, because the lessons we refuse to learn often find their way back to us, through people we least expect. It started like any ordinary Tuesday morning. Rain poured relentlessly over the city, painting silver streaks across the windshield of Thomas's luxury car. He was late. Again. A board meeting in 15 minutes, a presentation to lead, investors to impress. He hated being late. It made him feel human. And Thomas Reed despised feeling human. As the traffic light turned yellow, he sped up, splashing through a deep puddle near the crosswalk, and that's when he saw her. A young woman, standing at the edge of the street, holding an umbrella that barely worked. In 1 second, his car sent a wave of muddy water across her white blouse and face. She flinched but didn't move. Her umbrella fell. The rain drenched her completely. For a moment, their eyes met through the misty glass. Thomas expected anger. He expected shouting, maybe a curse, but instead, she just looked at him, calm, composed. Her expression carried something he hadn't seen in years, quiet dignity, and in that second, something inside him twisted. He didn't like the feeling. He looked away, pressed the gas, and drove off. "It's not my fault," he muttered. She should have stood back, but deep down, he knew that wasn't true. All day, that face haunted him. Those calm, steady eyes. He tried to shake it off, told himself it didn't matter. But guilt has a strange way of echoing in the places we try to ignore. That evening, the universe decided he hadn't learned his lesson yet. Because that same night, Thomas found himself at his company's annual charity gala, a glittering event filled with champagne, laughter, and people pretending to care about causes they barely understood. He was standing near the bar when he heard a familiar voice. Soft, confident, warm, "Mr. Reed?" He turned, and there she was, the woman from the crosswalk, her hair tied neatly, wearing a simple black dress, holding a clipboard with quiet confidence. Her name tag read, Amara Brooks, Event Coordinator. For a second, Thomas froze. She didn't seem to recognize him, or maybe she just didn't care. Her smile was professional but real. "You're seated at table 6, she said kindly. "Welcome, and thank you for attending tonight's fundraiser." Thomas nodded stiffly. "You work for the foundation?" "I help organize these events," Amara replied. "We raise scholarships for underprivileged kids. It's not glamorous, but it matters." Something about the way she said it matters made Thomas pause. He watched her move through the room with ease, directing staff, greeting donors, solving problems before anyone noticed. She had this aura about her, like light in a room full of shadows. He caught himself staring, and for the first time in a long time. He felt small. Later, as the event wound down, Thomas found himself standing by the coat rack, pretending to check his phone. Amara was there, gathering leftover decorations into boxes. He took a deep breath and walked up. "Hey," he said awkwardly. "About earlier today, I owe you an apology. She turned, her brows furrowing slightly. Earlier? The rain, he said, scratching his neck. That puddle. I think I was the one who splashed you. Amara blinked, then laughed. Not mockingly, but softly. Oh, you're that guy, she said. Well, my shirt forgave you hours ago. Her sense of humor caught him off guard. He chuckled nervously. Still, I should have stopped. It's fine, she said gently. We all have bad days. I've had worse. Thomas nodded, feeling strangely disarmed. He wasn't used to kindness that didn't come with expectation. Before he could think, he asked, Would you maybe want to grab a coffee sometime? Amara looked at him, really looked. Her eyes studied his face, searching for sincerity. Then she smiled faintly. You don't seem like the coffee type. Maybe I can learn, he said quietly. She hesitated. Maybe, she replied, picking up her coat, but only if you promise not to splash me next time. And with that, she walked away. Thomas stood there for a long time, watching her disappear into the rain. For a man who thought he understood everything about people, he suddenly felt lost. That night, lying in bed, he couldn't sleep. Her laugh echoed in his head. Her grace, her calm. He thought about the irony, how the woman he once would have judged without a second glance had become unforgettable. He didn't understand what was happening. All he knew was that for the first time in years, something cracked open inside him. Not guilt, not attraction, something deeper, a feeling he couldn't name, and though he didn't know it yet, that feeling would lead him on a journey of transformation, one that would shatter everything he believed and rebuild him into a man capable of love, empathy, and truth. Because sometimes it takes meeting the right person to realize how wrong you've been all along, and for Thomas Reed, that realization had just begun. They say change doesn't happen overnight, but sometimes it begins in a single heartbeat, a moment when your soul realizes it's been living behind closed doors. For Thomas Reed, that moment had a name, Amara Brooks. He didn't see her again for several days, but her face kept replaying in his mind. Like a quiet melody that refused to fade. It wasn't just her beauty, though she was striking. It was her calmness, her strength, the way she looked at the world without bitterness. He couldn't understand it. He had lived his whole life judging people like her. And yet, she had treated him with more grace than he probably deserved. One morning, as Thomas scrolled through his emails, one message caught his attention. It was an invitation, the Community Rise Project, seeking sponsors for educational programs. The name on the email signature, Amara Brooks. He stared at it for a long time. His company often ignored small community projects like this. They weren't profitable, but something in him, something new, pushed him to reply. Let's schedule a meeting, he wrote simply. When she arrived at his office 2 days later, Thomas was nervous in a way he hadn't been since his first job interview. She wore a beige blazer, hair neatly braided, confidence radiating from every step. Her eyes met his with polite professionalism. Mr. Reed, she greeted. Thank you for seeing me. Please, he said, gesturing to the chair. Call me Thomas. Her smile was brief. All right, Thomas. I appreciate your time. I'll get straight to it. She opened her folder, spreading out charts and photos across the desk, pictures of children, volunteers, classrooms that barely had walls. Her voice was calm but passionate as she explained how the project gave scholarships and mentorship to Black students from low-income areas. Thomas tried to focus on her words, but found himself watching her instead, the way her hands moved as she spoke, the fire in her tone. She wasn't trying to impress him. She believed in what she was saying. When she finished, she looked up. So what do you think? Thomas hesitated. The old version of him would have said no, would have brushed it off with some excuse about budget priorities. But that version of him felt outdated, I think, he said slowly. That it's a good idea, and I want my company to be part of it. Amara blinked, surprised. Really? Really, he said. Send me the paperwork. I'll handle the rest. For a second, she just looked at him, as if searching for the catch. Then she nodded. Thank you, Thomas. You won't regret this, but the truth was, he already didn't. That partnership became the start of something more. Not romance. Not yet, but connection. They began meeting regularly, discussing logistics, funding, plans for the future, and with every meeting, Thomas found himself listening more, talking less. She introduced him to people he'd never met before, community leaders, parents, kids. At first, he felt out of place, the color of the room, the laughter, the stories. It was all unfamiliar, but Amara never let him feel excluded. "This is Marcus," she said once, introducing a teenager who had just won a scholarship. "He's the first in his family to go to college." Thomas shook the boy's hand. "Congratulations, Marcus." "That's impressive." "Thank you, sir," Marcus said with a grin. "Miss Brooks told me you helped fund the program, so thank you for believing in us." Thomas didn't know what to say. Believing in us, no one had ever said that to him before. That night, as he drove home, the city looked different. He saw people, really saw them, not as categories or statistics, but as stories. For years, he had lived in a box built by ignorance, and now, piece by piece, Amara was tearing that box apart. One afternoon, after another long meeting, he found the courage to ask her out again. "I was thinking," he began carefully, "maybe you'd like to get dinner sometime." "As friends." "No work talk," she smiled faintly. "Friends, huh?" He nodded. "Yeah, friends." "All right," she said after a pause. "But only if you promise you won't bring your business voice," he laughed. Deal. That dinner changed everything. They met at a small restaurant Amara loved, a place filled with warm lights, old jazz, and the smell of roasted garlic. Thomas felt awkward at first, like he was trespassing in someone else's world, but Amara made it easy. She told stories, funny, deep, real ones, about her childhood, her dreams, her struggles. He listened like a man who'd been deaf for years and was finally hearing music. "So, what about you?" she asked halfway through their meal. "Who are you outside your suits?" He paused. "I don't know anymore," he admitted softly. "For a long time I thought I had it all figured out. But lately it feels like I've been wrong." "About a lot," Amara studied him. "That's called growth, Thomas." "It's messy, but it's beautiful," he smiled sadly. "Doesn't feel beautiful." "Feels uncomfortable," she nodded. "It's supposed to." Real change always does. Something about her words stuck with him long after the night ended, because for the first time Thomas wanted to change, not out of guilt, not to impress her, but because he wanted to become the kind of man she believed could exist. Weeks passed, and they grew closer. He started volunteering at her events, quietly helping where he could. He met families who reminded him how much love could exist even in struggle. He listened more, judged less. He started reading books Amara recommended, stories about history, culture, empathy. One night he sat alone in his penthouse, holding one of those books. The city lights shimmered below like stars trapped under glass. He thought about his father's words, his friends' jokes, the careless things he used to say, and suddenly shame washed over him, not for what others taught him, but for how long he let those lessons define him. He remembered the first time he saw Amara, how he'd looked at her through a window of judgment, and now he couldn't look at her without admiration. That's when he realized it wasn't just his opinion that had changed, it was his heart, the walls inside him. Those old, invisible walls were finally crumbling, and behind them he found something simple, something he had been missing all along, humanity. Because in trying to understand Amara, he had begun to understand himself. He didn't know where it was leading. He didn't know what she felt for him. But, for once in his life, Thomas wasn't afraid of not knowing. He just knew that every time she smiled, the world made a little more sense, and every time she spoke, the man he used to be faded a little more into the past. This wasn't a story about a savior. It wasn't a love story born from pity or guilt. It was a story about about learning that love isn't about what someone looks like. It's about what they make you see inside yourself. Thomas Reed was changing slowly, deeply, and though he didn't realize it yet, he wasn't just unlearning hate, he was learning love. They say love doesn't just happen, it transforms. It reshapes everything you thought you knew about yourself and the world around you. For Thomas Reed, that transformation wasn't loud or dramatic. It happened quietly, in moments so small that most people would never notice. But he noticed. He noticed the way Amara's laughter echoed differently inside him. He noticed how every Conversation with her chipped away at the armor he'd built around his heart. He noticed how, for the first time in his life, he wasn't chasing success or power. He was chasing meaning. One crisp autumn morning, Thomas found himself standing outside a community center in the south part of the city, a place he would have avoided months ago. Children ran past him, their shoes kicking up dust, their laughter filling the air. Amara was there, kneeling beside a little girl, tying her shoelaces with gentle care. When she looked up and saw him, she smiled. "I didn't think you'd actually come," Thomas smiled back. "You said you needed extra hands. I figured it was time I did something useful." She handed him a box of books. "Then welcome to the real world, Mr. Reed." That day changed him more than he could explain. He carried boxes, helped set up tables, served food. At one point, a little boy tugged at his sleeve and said, "Thanks for helping us, mister." Thomas knelt down. "You're welcome, buddy," the boy grinned. "Miss Brooks says good people help others. You must be good." The words hit deeper than he expected, because once upon a time, he wouldn't have been. Later that afternoon, as the sun painted everything in gold, Thomas watched Amara talk to the parents. The light caught her face, warm, alive, kind, and in that moment, he realized something. He wasn't just admiring her anymore. He loved her. But love, for him, came with fear, the fear of not being worthy of it. He had spent years building walls of prejudice and privilege. How could he deserve someone like her, someone who saw beauty in people he used to ignore? That night he sat by the window, staring at the city lights. He opened his laptop and started typing. Not an email, not a report, but a message. To her. "I don't know how to say this without sounding foolish, but I've changed because of you. You made me see things I never cared to see before, things I should have seen all along. I used to think kindness was weakness. Now I know it's strength. I don't know what this is between us, but whatever it is, I'm grateful for it. Thomas." He stared at the words for a long time before pressing send. The next morning, Amara called him. Her voice was calm but soft. "Thomas, can we talk?" "In person." They met at the park near her apartment. It was quiet, the air cool with the hint of rain. She stood there in a long brown coat, holding her phone. "I read your message," she began, "and I want to be honest with you. When I first met you, I didn't think you cared. You were just another man who looked through people like me." Thomas nodded. "You were right. I didn't care, but I do now, more than I ever have." She studied him for a moment, eyes searching for something deeper than words. "Do you know why that means something to me?" she asked. "Because real change isn't about pretending to care. It's about choosing to care, even when it's inconvenient." "I'm trying," he said softly. "I know," she replied. "And that's why I believe you." They sat down on a nearby bench. The silence between them wasn't awkward this time. It was peaceful, like two souls finally breathing the same air. Amara turned to him. "You know what I used to believe?" "What?" "That people like you never change. That no matter how much we talk about equality and love, deep down, some hearts stay cold." He looked at her. "And now?" She smiled faintly. "Now I believe people can surprise you." Her words settled in his chest like sunlight breaking through clouds. Days turned into weeks, and their connection grew quietly, naturally. It wasn't about grand gestures or confessions. It was in the little things, morning texts, shared laughter, quiet walks after long days. He started joining her projects regularly, not as a sponsor, but as a volunteer. He learned to listen, really listen, to people's stories. The world around him began to look different, not because it changed, but because he had. Then, one evening, something happened that would test everything he had learned. Amara invited him to a public event, a fundraiser for the Community Rise project. It was attended by local leaders, families, and media. Thomas was proud to be there, standing beside her. But halfway through the event, a reporter approached them and asked, "Mr. Reed, how does it feel supporting a community so different from your own?" Thomas froze for a second. The old hymn would have deflected, but this time he looked straight into the camera and said, "It feels like coming home." The room went silent. Amara turned to look at him, her eyes glistening with something between shock and pride. After the event, as they stood outside under the night sky, she said softly, "You didn't have to say that." "I wanted to," he replied. "Because it's true. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm part of something real." She smiled, her breath visible in the cold air. "You've changed, Thomas, and not because of me, but because you finally let yourself see the world for what it is." He shook his head. "You showed me how to see it." They stood there for a moment, the city lights glowing behind them, and then, quietly, he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was something better. Real. Two people from different worlds, standing side by side, not as symbols, but as proof that hearts can heal, that hatred can fade, and that love, real love, doesn't care about the color of your skin. Only the kindness in your soul. Weeks later, Thomas visited the diner where everything began, the same old smell of coffee, the same flickering sign. Only this time, he wasn't alone. Amara sat across from him, laughing softly as they shared breakfast. He looked at her, at the woman who changed everything, and whispered, "You know, if someone told me a year ago that I'd be here with you, I would have laughed." She smiled. "And now?" "Now," he said, taking her hand, "I just feel grateful." Amara looked at him for a long moment, her eyes warm and full. Then she said something he'd never forget. "Love doesn't erase the past, Thomas, but it gives us the courage to build a better future." He nodded slowly, his heart full, because in the end, this wasn't the story of a racist man who fell in love with a black woman. It was the story of a broken man who learned to be human again, the story of how one woman's grace turned ignorance into empathy, and how love, quiet, patient love, became his redemption. And as they walked out of that diner, hand in hand, Thomas realized something powerful. He didn't just fall in love with Amara Brooks. He fell in love with the person she helped him become.